Okay, hello and welcome to the next episode of When Tomorrow Comes. I'm Charlotte Orrell, Senior Futures Consultant in the Iceni team, and this week I'm lucky enough to host a discussion on the battle between repurposing our existing heritage buildings versus the pressure to knock them down and rebuild. So our very own Nirita from the Iceni Heritage team spoke passionately about the issue on Wednesday in her email, and she's joining us today to speak further on the topic. So thank you for joining us, Nirita.
Hello, I hope you're having a wonderful week. It's nearly over. So the article on Wednesday was basically one of my passionate subjects as to why does a building need to be listed for it to be reinvented in a sort of commercially viable and creative way. Why can't, like we recycle plastic and we recycle cardboard boxes at home, why can't we just have it as a habit of having option one, what we can reuse and how we can refurbish existing buildings. That was my main idea behind the article. I mainly took inspiration from Historic England's work in February 2020, which was published via Heritage Count's own document. If you guys want to go online and look for it, it's called There Is No Place Like Old Homes. It's fantastic. It's in terms of its data, it is so critical to understand the advantages in terms of the embodied carbon energy in refurbishing buildings, and hence my article for November.
Perfect. Thank you, Nirita. Short and sweet. We're also welcome today with Adela and our usual regulars, Ashley and Dan from the Iceni team. But Adela, thank you for joining us. I wondered if you wanted to do a bit of an intro, what your background is, who you work for, and if you have some initial comments on what Nirita's just spoken about.
Hi, so my name's Adela Leeson and I'm Head of Socioeconomic Analysis and Evaluation at Historic England. And I'm so pleased to be here to talk about this particular topic because I think we don't talk about it enough because it's quite difficult, it's quite technical, but it is really, really important for us to understand the absolute value of reusing what's already here. So we did some research last year and we commissioned Carry Conservation International to do some research in looking at, so what happens to our carbon emissions if we were to take a historic building, retrofit and refurbish it? What happens to carbon in that scenario? And then we took a third scenario, which is, what if we just knocked down the building, demolished it, rebuilt it with something similar size, similar function? What happens to carbon emissions then? And it is really interesting because one of the things that we always talk about is something we call operational carbon, which is when we use buildings, for example, heating is one of the biggest culprits, we produce carbon. But the thing we don't talk about enough is when we construct buildings, when we demolish buildings, we are creating so much more carbon because if you imagine a lot of our materials, our building materials are imported from places very far afield. Often they've also imported those raw materials from other places even further afield, or maybe even closer to where we are today. And that entire process of extraction, transportation, production, transportation, construction is creating so much carbon that we just are not accounting for when we consider reducing our carbon footprints. And we know this, so there are things underway, but there is still a really long way to go. And what we found in our research is that carbon can account for a third of the carbon emitted by building over 50 years. So that is a really significant proportion of that building. And you know, when we talk about sustainability, we really think heritage has a lot to add here because we put an example, and there are plenty of this. This was just one. It's called Juice House and it's in Lincolnshire. And it's a building that's almost 900 years old. I haven't done the maths of it, but if you imagine how many generations of people have been through that building, it's still functionally operational. It houses a restaurant at the moment. And it continues its life. Is that not what sustainability is about? Conservation is, to me, about sustainability, but of course I would say that because I'm from historic England, but that is what we need to think, is the intergenerationality of the things we're doing, the buildings we're using. If we can make them last another 100 years, another 200, 900 years, that's where we get sustainability. That's where we use less materials. That's where we reduce our waste. And that's how we can be sustainable and continue along this really important journey.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Adela. The concept is really embodied in the whole long life, loose fit, low energy concept, where you design a building to be flexible, to be adaptable. I mean, one of my favourite buildings is the Oxo Tower on the south bank of the Thames in London. Not a particularly sort of revolutionary green building, but if you think it's been there for years, it's been industrial, it's been commercial, it's been residential, it's retail. The same building fabric has used all those has accommodated all those different uses, and it's quite a striking, attractive building to boot. So it's win-win-win in that scenario, because you're not having to constantly knock down and rebuild.
And
yeah, no, I agree as well. I think these are the principles that we want to see at the forefront of planning and development, really. We can't deny that. But we want to also make way and enable more housing, and more homes to come forward. But I think that this can happen side by side alongside delivering homes. I recently worked on a scheme, in fact, Narita, you were working on it with me in Hackney, which was, a building that initially the plan was to knock it down and to rebuild something new. But instead, what has gone into planning is the retention of that full building. Yes, it's got a little bit of a one-story extension on the top, but it is refurbed, it's retained, and it is going to be an improved and better building for the future, and is more likely, I think, to last a lifetime than any new build would have done in its place. And I do think that people do need to sort of stop and think and consider the option of retention and refurbishment and maybe sort of upward extensions, to utilise and make the most of the building, but also improving it, and not sort of demolishing things just for the sake of it.
Yeah.
One of the things that came out quite clearly in the discussions when I was doing the research, as well as some responses, is the VAT. We know that the VAT on refurbishing of buildings is actually much higher, and there's none for new build. Now, we're not at all saying that we shouldn't be building new build. We should be absolutely building new homes because we need them. We should be building new settlements, but that can be augmented with the reuse of historic buildings. But this issue of VAT is a huge disincentive to do the same. And I know Historic England have been pushing this, but Dala, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I suppose for us, it is really, so as I said, in order to be sustainable and to continue the lives of these buildings, they need to be repaired and maintained and kept in good order, because when you lose the condition of these buildings, that's when they quickly become physically obsolete. And there is a thing, what we really are advocating for is a little bit of a shift. Instead, we do need new homes, we do need new office spaces, community spaces, leisure spaces. But what we're really asking for is to shift the onus to reuse first, and then consider what the options are where we need to build new. And we think there will be a lot of instances for that. And that is where we really question the VAT, the way it's laid out at the moment, the way it's structured. And it's a very old piece of monetary taxation policy. And we think society, and we know society has changed so much since, and we know our resources are much more limited probably than when the policy was first created. And what we want to do is just have that real signaling and really saying, this is what we believe in, this is what we want to do, is to reuse first. Now, the evidence around VAT is something that we know we need to develop and be very robust in understanding what the implications, because obviously there are, it's taxation policy and it can't be taken lightly. But we really, really do want that policy to be reviewed and look at the evidence and look at ways of encouraging behavior change, ways of encouraging people to go into thinking about reusing first and recycling, as we do in so many other walks of life. Buildings are a really important part of our very social and work fabric. So we need to rethink how we incentivize these behaviors to repair and maintain and retrofit and create more energy efficiency. I think one of the key things for us to highlight is we understand that we need to do work to buildings. We understand that we need to make them more energy efficient, but it's really important, going back to the embodied carbon, that in our attempts to make buildings more energy efficient, that we don't increase consumption to a level where we start producing more carbon in that, because energy efficiency and retrofit does have a carbon cost. So it's really it's a difficult balance, but we think we need to get much more evidence, particularly for historic buildings, because there are real information asymmetries. So in economic terms, there are market failures relating to information. And a lot of the innovation for us is similar to the VAT issue. A lot of the innovation is happening around new buildings, but all buildings work very differently. So they need bespoke solutions. And sometimes we threaten the lives of historic buildings through maladaptation, by implementing tools and activities that were never made for the type of building that these are. So again, there's an information failure there, where we would really like, because one of the key things we highlight in our research is we know that 80% of the buildings that are here today will be here in 2050 when we're at our net zero. So, the balance is really in the field of existing buildings. There are 5.1 million homes which were built over 100 years ago. So we really need to start looking at those and putting energy and effort into innovation around those buildings and their kind of unique functions and their distinctiveness, and making sure we enhance that, as well as kind of create new energy efficient buildings that are functional.
One of the things I've always thought would work is if you gave a discount on VAT for energy efficiency measures. So sort of halfway house between the two. If you're doing a retrofit project and you're making a building more energy efficient and you can demonstrate that, then you qualify for a lower or even a zero VAT rate, because make it comparable with a new building. Because the approaches you have to take when you do energy efficiency measures on existing buildings are bespoke. There is no kind of rule book or playbook, because as you quite rightly point out, all buildings are different, and a lot of people just file that under the too difficult category, knock it down, start again. Where actually, if you think about things in an intelligent and sensitive manner, you can actually come up with some really beautiful solutions. There's loads of different examples out there of sympathetic retrofits that are also energy efficient, and incorporate the latest technology, but done so in a sensitive way that doesn't alter the character of the building.
I think that's what would be quite interesting for me, is knowing obviously where the economics of this lies, because I can imagine developer coming to me and saying, well, how does this stack up in terms of numbers if I retain versus demolish? And I see, Ashley, you're talking about the case that you had, where that decision was changed, because a lot of the time I'm in agreement that the building should be retained if it can be, and sometimes the numbers just don't stack up. So in that situation, I don't know what your sort of justification arguments would be, or actually if there is a value on retaining it in terms of sales and rental, because Narita, you picked up on it in your article. I'm in the same book of I would love my home to have period features, and I put a value on that. So equally, can there be a value for other buildings when you're looking at the value, the rental or sales values at the end of a refurb?
Yeah, this is a really big but very important issue. that is recognized amongst economists in particular, that there's Joseph Stiglitz is a Nobel laureate of economics, and he says what you measure determines what you do. If you measure the wrong things, you do the wrong things. And I guess carbon is one of those things. We're not measuring embodied carbon, so we're not necessarily doing the right things as far as that's concerned. Equally, within it, when we talk about what is the value of heritage, which we do in some of our publication series called Heritage Counts, Heritage and the Economy, one of the things is that in economic terms, we tend to be able to capture market values much easier than we capture non-use values, they're called, is that some things, even if I haven't visited, for example, Stonehenge, I still want that site to exist, for example. Well, you know, in lockdown, we've been everyone's been kind of taking these long walks in their local areas, and I've found myself walking in a conservation area, not knowing it is, but because it has this tranquility, uniformity, something that is really special, but really difficult to put your finger on. It's something characterful, unique, distinctive. And that's where we are working with the Department for Culture, Media and Sports at the moment, DCMS, to try and develop our tools, our economic tools on how we measure those
intangible.
Yeah. You feel them, they're sort of emotional, and that's where economics really struggles to pick those things up.
It's not maths.
But it's really important, because what economics is about allocating funding so it's efficient and meets people's needs and preferences. And if those are our preferences, but they're not captured in economic models, then we're missing something, where society wants something, but our economic model and data is telling us something else, because those are the easy things to measure. So there is a methodology for doing it, and it's called total economic value. And this is what we're really trying to develop with something we're now looking into called culture and heritage capital. And it's developing a framework for trying to capture those. It's difficult, it will never be done perfectly, and the methods are still in development. But there are ways, for example, of looking at what the premium value is around historic building and the value added that people would be willing to pay in order to acquire that asset. But there are also things around public value, is that even though you own a historic building, other people can get value out of that building existing and being in their path along which they walk on a day-to-day basis. So it's really for us, because again, it's this intergenerationality, the sustainability, and thinking in a bigger picture way, and understanding that heritage has its market value, but there are also non-use values, and we need to capture those in our investment decisions.
I was just going to add as well, just in terms of sort of the way the sort of role that planning plays in all of this. I think that there have been some changes in some local authorities in terms of policies, and local authorities realizing that they can't just needlessly demolish every building to make way for new homes. So for instance, I was doing some work in Camden recently, and I don't often do work in Camden, but I realized that they have a policy whereby if you're going to be demolishing sort of a home to replace it with another home, that new home needs to be of the highest sustainability standards. You need to be able to prove that it is going above and beyond. And I thought that was really, really interesting, that is in a step, one step in the right direction, in terms of just sort of making people stop and think about the need to demolish it, and whether the new building is actually going to be performing at a better standard than the existing one. But I think
sorry, I was just going to say, I bet they've done it for the Highgate area, because that's exactly where we had these kind of problems. You demolish a mega mansion and put an even bigger mega mansion there.
Yeah, no, you're probably right. That's probably the reason for it. But I think that a lot of this conversation has sort of reminded me of, it's just some of the basic principles of planning, and the presumption in favor of sustainable development. This is the first type of sustainable development is to reuse the building that we have. But I think that maybe part of that meaning has gotten slightly lost, and it's assumed that sustainable development has to mean a brand new building, whereas actually what we're saying here is that we can utilize our existing building stock and make better development out of it.
Yeah.
To finish up very quickly, because I'm conscious of time then, based upon that, what's more sustainable, a heritage building or a brand new build with all the latest gadgets? What would the arguments be?
It depends on the lifespan of the building. If you build a new building and it's there for 300 years and it's energy efficient for about that time, then you might make a case and say I'm going to be probably controversial here, and say make a case for the new build and say, look, it's brand new, it's got low embodied materials, low carbon embodied materials, uses wood, uses latest gadgets and everything like that. So I'm going to go for the new build.
I have done projects where I've refurbished historic buildings with all the latest new gadgets. So I'm going to go for historic buildings.
Yeah, I would naturally go for historic buildings, because I do think that we're not accounting enough for the carbon we produce by demolishing and constructing new. So every time we consume new materials, we are producing carbon, and we don't count that, and that is why we think it's new buildings, whereas in fact I would argue historic buildings are more sustainable.
Do I have to put a vote in as well?
Yeah, I'm waiting for you, actually.
I think I can see both sides of the story, obviously, and both options are great. But I think I'm going to go with Dan on this one. But I'm going to go with Dan on the basis of assuming we, are demolishing a building which is, a blight on the local area and has not been built to good standards, and really can do with being a better contributor to townscape and to sustainability. And I think that we need to balance up all of these things in the work that we do. But yeah, protecting our heritage assets and making sustainable development is obviously the best option for everyone.
I think that's a very balanced answer. Well done. Right, I'll wrap it up there. Thank you everyone for taking part. Adela for joining us today.
And last minute joining as well.
Yes,
so
always.
Thank you even more.
No, really good conversation. Really.
I think we might have lost you, Charlotte. I can't hear you, but I think we were just closing up the recording. I'll say thank you to everyone on behalf of Charlotte's broken microphone. And we'll see you all next time.
Yeah, see you all. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.